Hello and welcome to The Blueprint. I'm your host, Marley Finnegan. And before we dig in, please click like and subscribe below. No matter where you get your podcast, it helps us to reach more people. Also, consider leaving us a small donation, whether that be $1, $5 via one of the links below. It really helps us in funding the creation of this work. And it means a lot to know that you're out there and that you like us. So let's dig in. Hello and welcome to the Blueprint Within. I am Marley Finnegan and I am thrilled to be joined today by the amazing Drea Burbank. She is an MD technologist, one of the co-founders of Savimbo, an author, early Web3 creator, poet, and self-proclaimed solarpunk. Drea, so awesome to be with you today. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Um, so you do so much. It was like a real, it was a test of my mind to even figure out where to begin and how to start. So let's begin with your childhood and how, the through lines to all the amazing work that you do and that you bring to the world.
Oh yeah. So I grew up off the grid in central Idaho. I was homeschooled. I tested into university at 18. I was pulled out of school at 10 and tested into university at 18. Um, I think I kind of flunked out of polygamy. There was a moment when I was about 17 where I was evaluated for progression in my culture and failed. And everybody was like, we don't know what you're gonna do, but it's you're not fitting in here. And I remember feeling horrified by that.
Mm.
And my community was a little bit like a complicated kindness. So they were like, you need to go to university. We don't know what you're going to do there, but that's where you belong. You're reading the encyclopedias for fun. Dostoevsky is not something normal that 10-year-olds do. Like, you need to go to university. So they were really kind about kicking me out. And I was really scared about going. And then I paid for university with firefighting.
Mm.
It was the 90s and they had affirmative action. And so I was in a low income program cleaning toilets, and we had a fight at work because I was a very like I had no social skills, and I was working with the football team out of a 600 person town, and they were like, "You're an idiot," and I was like, "Fine," and then they said, "We can do more." Pull-ups. I don't know. We ended up in a pull-up competition, but I did seven and the guy did four, and they were like, you're hired." And I was like, "Why?" And I didn't realize the BLM had made a law about seven pull-ups, and most women couldn't do seven pull-ups. So I was like instantly onto a fire crew, and I was on uh like working with ex-convict post-incarcerated gang intervention. At one point I was on a fire crew with 300 men and me. And yeah, and it was just like a really tough shock to the system. So I would say I was raised by fundamentalists and firefighters, and both of those groups were very gruff and kind in their own way.
Oh my
But they
God.
kind of balanced each other out.
Wow, Drea, and you did that for 9 years in wildland firefighting, and that was from the age of 18 to
Yeah, I guess that would have been so. I think I quit when I got into med school, and there I took a couple. Took 1 year off, I think, when I was, and I did river rafting instead. Big
Mm.
career change. I did river rafting. I just discovered I was an adrenaline junkie. I was working in the LA foothills on a hotshot crew, and I discovered what an adrenaline junkie I was. And I was like, oh, this is it. Like, this is what I'm going to do forever. And then it's very physical. That job was incredibly physical. And especially if you're a woman, where just from a physics perspective, you're working with like 6'4" man, you're a 5'4" woman, and you've got like a different angle to your hips. You actually put a different load bearing on your knees. And so my large joints started to get arthritis. And I was like, okay, I got to stop. And it was really tough to give it up. So I was heartbroken at moving on. And I decided to go into medicine. Went through
Wow.
the phone book and was like, this would be a great job in a small town.
Oh my gosh. And were people able to recognize like your unique ability to learn and your unique ability to absorb information? I mean, that is unbelievable what you were reading and doing and seeing, and also just like the amalgamation of, I think, what I've witnessed in the way that I perceive you see the world, which is extremely, extremely all encompassing. So really, really wildly incredible. And you also are an MD technologist. And I guess for me, not being a specialist in either one of those realms necessarily, how did those aspects come together for you? Is that a super common area to operate in?
No, no,
Because it was
no.
kind of new to me, but um you say you study how technology makes us sick. And so I think that a lot of people fear technology today, and also wanting to talk about how Savimbo intersects in that world, and how you came into working with Savimbo, but also I guess let's first talk about the MD technology piece and how you came into that realization that you should be focused on that.
Yeah, there's an existential depression people get when they realize that they have a certain cognitive ability, like a certain level of cognitive ability. In other words, they could really do frontier work in like math and biology, or in medicine or and music, and then they can't do both. Just simply the pragmatic limits of one lifetime means you can have to choose one or the other, and you feel like you're scraping a part of yourself off.
Mm.
And that's the way I felt in medicine when I started to realize that I both loved plastic surgery, like one of the most intervention heavy things. Like I loved tissue engineering and I loved microsurgery and I loved the kinesthetic beauty of reconstructive medicine, surgery in particular. And then I also loved preventative medicine, like two opposite ends of the spectrum. And I was like stuck in the middle. I was like, I want to do both. I ended up doing kind of both, which is I shouldn't have gotten away with, but I just really wanted to scratch my itch in terms of developing the science on the two fields. With the preventative medicine, I was obsessed with making a visual EHR. So like Plants versus Zombies, there's so much information that's written down in medicine that you could do with a visual interface. And I was obsessed. I went to Silicon Valley, realized how hard it was to do anything in medicine. And then I started working on behavior change. So I started falling further and further out of medicine into health. The further you get outside the hospital, the more you're preventing illness, the more you get into behavior change. So I worked in behavior change and was working at like the state level. And I would argue that most of what I do right now is applying that science, which is really well characterized in like tobacco control or marijuana or whatever, into stopping deforestation in the Amazon. So when I met Johnny and Fernando, I just kind of had a grab bag of behavior tricks that I knew to fall back on that could be automated. And so that's what we're doing now. Is that too crazy?
No, no,
Yeah.
it's amazing. And also, I mean, you're a polymath, and I can see how having to pick one lane of one, medicine, for example, a huge aspect of life, and so many ways you can intervene and support change. Now, I wrote and came upon, I think how I first came upon you was your article on unified planetary consciousness that you wrote.
Thanks for reading that.
Oh my God, I was like obsessed with it. It was like
Yeah.
reading my heart. Um, but how do you see aspects of your work evolving toward that end? Because it sounds like you took what you learned from this behavioral science into working to bridge business to having a consciousness of indigenous land stewardship and protecting, the lungs of the earth. So, how do you see things evolving in the last few years of your work as far as going from, I think what felt sometimes like a little bit of hopefulness around business as usual economics to what I perceive as like some serious traction for Savimbo and what you're doing, from what I see.
Yeah, I think I don't remember who it was because I should know this, but I don't. He said if I had a big enough lever and a place to stand, I could move the world.
Mm.
And there's a lot of geometry in that. Like if you find the right place or the right tipping point or the right lever, you can do a lot. And I think if you can kind of see those things more clearly, which I have the blessing or curse to do,
Mm.
you kind of end up in the right place at the right time, doing just the right thing, just because you can. Like, and a little bit of effort will go a long ways in different ways. So, there was a lot of different factors that factored into us being able to launch a biodiversity credit, first time in human history that it OTC traded from this one place in the Colombian Amazon. Like, why was this one place able to do that when no other place did? There was all these other factors that factored in. Like, it had been a very war-torn, violent region for a long time, and then it had recently become peaceful. The population was really interested in having a peaceful change, but they didn't have other businesses available to them. So they were open to a change, whereas other places were already saturated with businesses that might not have been as good of a move. And so we could do a leapfrog scientifically and technically. And this one, you know, it was an ethical area to do that. Um, I think that if you are born with certain abilities, and I have to be transparent that I am born with those abilities. It doesn't really matter where you're born with them. Like if you're born in a area of the world where those don't get optimized, like I was, um, or you're born in like a super, you know, easy, you know, you're like getting private school and parents that are giving you all the resources that you need to work, you still have a level of responsibility. Because if
Mm,
you're the only one that can solve a problem, then you have to. It's not like there is an ethics of inaction that hit you. And
mm,
I felt my whole life the ethics of inaction incredibly powerful.
mm,
Like if I don't use this, I will have thrown a gift away that I was given and did not deserve, did not earn. So most of my life, I felt very driven by that. Like I could solve these problems, so therefore I need to.
mm. That is incredible. And I mean, I think I told you writing to you, it was intimidating because your genius and level of understanding and gifts across so many aspects of life and industry are utterly incredible. And I wonder, were you inherent with your gifts and being born with that sense of responsibility? Were you also born with a really heightened sense and state of consciousness of understanding the way the world worked and having that sort of like spiritual interconnection in a bigger way?
That is a really good question. Because intellect and consciousness are not the same dimensions in my experience.
Mhm.
I had a certain degree of ability. So currently, when people work with us, we use Garner's theory of multiple intelligences. We kind of map people on the nine intelligences to music, aesthetics, interpersonal, intrapersonal. People can have different expressions of different ones. They can be way like three standard deviations off on one and like normal on the other. You'll often see kids, they kind of develop if they're like me, they'll develop a little bit. We usually tend to say that if somebody's like three standard deviations off, they fall outside of the zone of tolerance. So they're so divergent in that dimension that it's hard for them to communicate with other people.
Mm.
And then that's when they kind of end up in our group so that we can TLC them, maybe spank them into better behavior because it's very easy to take advantage of other people when you have certain gifts. And at a certain point in my life, I had bad habits because I could, and it just seemed like people weren't keeping up, and I was manipulative at a certain point in my life. And then I had a very rapid and abrupt shift in consciousness, which I felt very put upon by, which suddenly made me like hyper aware of how I was misbehaving. The
Mm.
first thing that happened was I just had this huge bright spotlight shone on the inside of my psyche and my own douchebaggery that I may or may not have been aware of before. And once you're aware of it, oh my God, you cannot stop seeing it everywhere. And there's no quicker fix for some bad behaviors. So I oftentimes think, you know, why would you judge somebody if you could only gift them the ability to see it themselves, they probably would change it immediately. So most people, I think, don't consciously make mistakes. It's
Mhm.
like the core problem is sitting in the unconscious areas. Because I know for me, when I became conscious of what I was doing, I really changed fast.
Yeah.
And I still go through that occasionally where I'm like, oh shit, that's a huge mistake, and I can finally see it.
Yeah, I resonate with that deeply. This past February, I had massive shadows come up for me that subconscious, deep things that were like all encompassing that I thought I had done a lot of work around. So, was there an event or anything that led to that spotlight shining in your subconscious?
Yeah, I wrote a book about it, and I will say I don't normally talk about it in a work context because the book is
Yeah.
pretty cray cray, and I'm okay with cray cray, and I put it all in the books. There's no hidden cray cray. It's all very public cray cray, but nobody reads it, thank God. What happened was I went to the universe, and was trying to figure out what kind of doctor to be. I was in the fourth year of med school, and I was like, what kind of doctor should I be, universe? I am doing real good in life. I'm super smart and hot, and everybody likes me, and I'm going to be rich. And I was like, so given that I'm sitting on top of the world, I was like, I had this niggling feeling. I mean, I just think of myself as such a dumbass here. So I'm sitting on this lake on a dock, I'm talking to God, and I'm like, I had this niggling feeling that although I am totally perfect, there could be something more. And I said, what else? What else is there? And this so like confident place. And then I was just 100% like this huge bright spotlight came on in my head, and I was just devastated. Like I lost everything
Mm.
all at once. Because what I thought was so great was not so great. And I didn't
Mm.
see it clearly at the time, but I really thought I was really the world's best asshole. And then I saw that I was just an asshole. And it was very humbling, and it was good for me. And I'm so grateful that happened. But
Mm.
but I learned during this period that intelligence and consciousness are not the same fucking.
Yeah.
I'm
Wow.
not even sure intelligence is necessary to reach consciousness, and I don't really know totally how they intersect. But
Isn't that, I mean, that is such a amazing and also really challenging experience. And I wanted to just ask, you said you were on a dock? Were you by the water?
yeah, I had driven onto this lake and I was staring at the stars. It was like the closest I get to like, okay, this is my idea, God. I was like, here, God, let's have a talk. I
Wow.
was like, because I had a really tough life before that, and I like finally clawed my way to the top of this little pile, and I thought I was on the top of the world, and I was, like if you look at it, I had a lot of ego things that
Mhm.
that should have made me feel satisfied, and thank God that I got them because I got them and I realized, wow, this something's missing.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, don't know if you're there or not, but like, what would that be? What if I was looking for the real deal? What would it feel like, or what would it be? And it was very much an open-ended question, which
Mhm.
means that I got a real answer and I got a lightning bolt. I had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, and I had like a very rough ride for the next 3 years. And then I figured out what had happened and kind of put it all into context and normalized it. And now I can act like a normal person again.
Mm.
But the
I
Buddhists say that there's the point where the mountain is not a mountain and then the mountain is a mountain again. Definitely had
love
both of those.
I totally relate. I had a Kundalini awakening in 2020, and I was literally like crying to like every leaf and every blade of grass, and like, I am you, you are me. And it took a while for me to like
Yeah.
land back here in my body. It's interesting because I have a big relationship with water and this inclination that our humanity's relationship to water is a big part of our continued expansion, or maybe part of the movement towards what you called um, unethical inaction, or sorry.
Oh, for like, there's like a non-doing. There's Wu Wei. Wu Wei is the one I use right now. Oh my
Uh-huh.
God. Also, you kind of like I've certainly over the last 12, 15 years since this started, I'll go through periods where I'm like, I got it. I know what I'm doing. And then it's all gone. And then I start again. And I like it's another layer of the onion. But at a certain point, I was really obsessed with Wu Wei, which is like I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong, which is like the right doing at the right time. So
Uh-huh.
not necessarily non-doing. A lot of people get stuck on non-doing or overaction, but like the right amount of action for the right for the now. And I'm working on that one right now.
So when you see solutions and when you are able to sort of use your gifts to establish the lever at the right place at the right time, are you are you seeing like both the macro and the whole and the details, or like how does your brain work such that you can see the lever so clearly? Is it because you can absorb information and understanding at like a scale in which is not common? Or is there something else happening that allows you to be able to see those levers?
So they call it cognitive horizon, where you can hold more than like the best example I tell people a lot is Professor X when in the X Files when he goes into the room, he goes out in the chair and then he holds all these data points in the air at the same time and then he can see patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Cognitive horizon is essentially how many data points you can hold in the air.
Wow.
And when the Kundalini hit my brain, that number exponentially expanded for me. And so that makes it a little bit easier to hold a paradox, kind of like you can hold two paradoxical thoughts at the same time in the same place, and then maybe see a resolution.
Mm,
Um, that's not normal. And
yeah.
just because you can see a pattern doesn't mean you can explain it or have fully processed it. So it's easy to get overloaded with that kind of information. I work really hard on scale. So like you'll oftentimes see like a Hollywood movie, they'll like pan out, they'll look at the kind of the big scale, they'll pen in and then they'll like go to a scene and they'll cut to a scene. So for me it's important to like kind of zoom out, get an idea where I'm at in space and time, just get in and like, okay, this is what I'm doing today, and then try and play the scene fully embodied. And I'm not that good at it. It's a lot of information to handle,
Yeah.
and you can really get, it's hard to stay balanced with it.
Hmm. I think you're personally amazing at it. And that's from following you on LinkedIn. That's so silly, but it's like what you say and do and bring and the reality in which you are able to bridge areas of industry and concept that I think people have struggled with for a really long time. Um, is really inspiring and important. And can you, just so everybody that maybe is listening who isn't familiar with Savimbo, can you explain what the challenge was there initially that Savimbo aims to solve and why it was challenging and how you're solving it?
Oh yeah, for sure. Okay, so first of all, I need to give credit to the source of my material. I tend to channel. If you hear me doing something good, it's probably not me.
Love it.
I'm really good at asking and stepping out of the way. So most of the solutions, that's why so much of our work is open source, is because I don't really feel like I'm the author of it. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that I'm perfect at it, but I would be disingenuous if I took credit for a lot of my work. Okay, back to Savimbo. So Savimbo came as a question with Johnny and Fernando. You think you're so smart. Why haven't we gotten paid for conservation in 20 years?
Mm.
And then I was like, I don't know, let me look at it. And then I came back and I was like, the answer was like, 42, like the universe and everything. It was like 42. There's no reason. There's not a good reason why you haven't gotten paid. It looks like racism, maybe your colonialism, or I just don't know why they haven't gotten paid, but you should get paid. And then we were like, okay, how are we going to get paid? And we were like, and I'll just put that stat in here so you got an idea. But essentially, Indigenous people have roughly protect about 30% of the intact planet. The last 30% we need intact for the limits of growth. And then an estimated 80% of the biodiversity, and they get less than 1% of the climate funding directly.
Mm.
So then we
Mhm.
were like, okay, we're gonna fix that. And then we were like, okay, how do we do that? So Johnny Fernando said, look, we have it. We know what we're doing. We want a for-profit business because everything that cuts down our jungle is for profit: mining, logging, narco trafficking, oil, agribusiness, and then cattle. So they're like, it has to be for profit because that's all we see. So that's the only thing that's going to work here. And then they wanted no strings attached. So they wanted it to be a green economy. So anything that didn't cut down jungle or like made things better ecologically. And then they wanted no strings attached was their last rule. And I love that rule because that rule was essentially, we want no colonialism, but we don't know how to say that.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
we decided we were going to say it as the mango fund. So, like, in other words, because we try and explain it to people really simply, like, okay, so you have a tree and mangoes fall off the tree. You can't buy the tree, you can only buy the mango. That's what we tell people. So we say mango economy. That's
Love
kind of
that.
the joke.
So
Yeah.
beautiful. Wow. And
But
yeah, and I mean, can you talk about how this is expanding, how and the process of the biodiversity credits and how you were able to establish that?
yeah, so very carefully, in order to stop, we always joke about this at work. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time?
Mm-hmm.
So it was just this huge elephant when we started, and we were like, this will never happen, it'll never work. And we all felt overwhelmed and we all felt depressed about it. And the chainsaws were at the borders of Johnny's farm. I remember One day
Mm,
hiking into the farm and the chainsaws were cutting down the trees, like right at the border of his farm, and a bulldozer was in there, and it was just like the worst feeling in the world.
wow.
So I'm gonna cry.
Oh.
So we did this like Gandalf thing, and I was
Mm,
just like, absolutely fuck it. You shall not pass. Like we're gonna stop the bulldozers before they get to Johnny's farm. Like it's just Johnny's farm, and it's just one bulldozer, and we're gonna stop it here. And
mhm,
in order to do that, we had to like turn the whole world and just turn it on its axis. It was crazy. We had to
mm,
go get to the World Economic Forum and get this huge phalanx of like powerful indigenous negotiators in there to just to break these rules and rewire them. And it was just like so much work for one little farm in the Amazon. And it was worth it though. So
mm.
it made it concrete, it made the problem concrete, it made it stable, it made it a simple vertical, and it made it a clear problem that was something you could break down and work on. And that's what we ended up with. So now this model, it can be used anywhere in the world. I've had calls from desert, Arctic, ocean in the last month. We probably 200 different projects. People are adopting it all over the world.
Wow. And it's all, as you mentioned, it's all open source on the website.
Yeah. And I will say that it was not my idea. I was so desperate that I begged. I got on my knees and I just begged for help.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, I cannot do this. It was beyond my ability.
Yeah.
And I felt like I got a miracle. So when I look at the credit and stuff, like people are like, why are you doing that for yourself? Or, your name's on it and stuff like that. My name is on it because they need my name to run it, right? But it's a miracle. It's a gift. And I'm grateful for it. And I'm going to do my best to make it work.
It's so important. And how do you recommend that people best engage, maybe other indigenous communities or land stewards that don't know maybe all that you know? How would you recommend? And thank you also. I mean, I am y- I'm enthralled by your channeling, but also I'm enthralled by your humanness in your heart and your brain and your body and all that you are, because um, there's a lot of will that's required to do what you're doing, and also just to have that deep sense of accountability and responsibility to do and work with the gifts that you have.
Sorry, I'm surprised I cried, but like, I'm not even really this honest about how tough it's been. But the good news is that what we did is automated and it's live. So it's free, it's open source, and it's computer code. And I think people miss that a lot. Like just like Google Translate, you don't need to speak all English and all Spanish to type it into the box. And right now, pretty much any community can just show up and type it into the box.
Wow.
And the
Wow.
translation to international markets is done. And that's not for me. It took about a year. We had a group of people and their names are on the protocol for how we did it. And it's because it's not from me, it's not my gift to give. It's just my
Mm.
job to make sure that people know about it.
Mm. And what advice would you have for people, like in terms of the organizational layers required to be able to, I guess, establish the foundational business aspect of being able to translate that into support? I mean, I guess,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, how do you bridge that part?
Well, I would tell people try not to go tilt at windmills. Like, don't reinvent money, don't reinvent business. Just pick up whatever like organizational structure makes the most sense, is the most pragmatic in your area. We like Stripe from I think it's Stripe Frontier. No, it's not. Sorry, Stripe Atlas, where you can create like a $600 Delaware C in the U.S. that's foreign owned. Gets
Mm,
your bank account, you're off to the races. You don't need to be crazy and reinventing like a new cryptocurrency in order to get a biodiversity credit going, arguably. And then I've seen people use it with charity as an outcome metric, so they're asking for donations in their jurisdiction, and I've seen people using it to certify. You can stack it on top of carbon, you can do all kinds of crap. So um I always tell too many people are trying to throw everything into the kitchen sink when it comes to solving one simple problem, which is like how to preserve an ecosystem.
yeah.
And I think use it where it works and use it in the most rapid and easy to apply way possible.
Interesting. And do you think is it specific to different types of ecosystems, or could it be for like a bioregional hub that's established by a community, you know?
It's reliant. This is the hack, and it's not my hack. It's partly Johnny's hack. If you talk to any indigenous community, they'll say they have totemic animals. So, like in Australia, the pygmy possum, that's our totemic animal. It's like a little rodent. They're like, this is the thing. And in the Amazon, it's a jaguar. If you actually look, those animals directly translate into indicator species. So they're really
Mm.
good proxy metric for the ecosystem. They're like a special little puzzle piece that kind of represents the whole puzzle. And so most ecosystems will have a set. We usually just make a little set of cards, like magic cards, and you've got all your indicator species for that ecosystem, and you're just keeping an eye on them, not the whole ecosystem. So it's really easy, convenient, direct translation. It's been internationally negotiated. It's not perfect. You could always do a gazillion dollars worth of connectivity studies and eDNA sampling and satellite monitoring, or you could just do this. It's good enough and then
Wow.
get back to work preserving the ecosystem. So we didn't want to spend a lot of time measuring what we were doing. We wanted to have a good enough metric so that we could focus on the action.
Oh my God, that is literally such genius. Wow. And so, when you are now to the part of getting paid for that work, that important work, like, are you going directly to corporations, or are there marketplaces which you're finding success in, or like, what are the biggest success metrics? Is it just being out there, and like, how are you getting corporations and other funders to support?
It's kind of an unsolved problem right now. We've identified a map of who could buy and who is buying. So there's who could buy and who did.
Mm.
And I learned a while ago to just ignore anybody who could. They're not helping me. They're going to conferences, they're making nature pledges, they're running around talking to people, and they're just
Right.
talk. They're full of hot air. So I
Right.
started paying very close attention. That was the core insight for me. I started paying very close attention to who did buy, no matter how small it was. It was $5. I was like, that's my guy. Like somebody's standing there talking about 50 million and they're calling me and saying you have to answer the phone and the other guy buys $5. I started to pay attention to the $5 guy. So that's to put money into my account. And then I realized they were radically different. The $5 guy never had a reason. Um, and he was often very subtle. So when I started to focus on that, I realized, okay, there's like consumers, small businesses, and then enterprises. There's like mega enterprises, and then there's traders, and those kind of all fit together.
Mhm.
It looks to me like the small business segment might be our best buyer, but we'd have to scale that pretty radically. So we're working on enterprise, and then traders might just pick it up and solve our problems. I don't want to be in the business of selling credits. I don't think it's very efficient. There's a lot of sales channels already established, and that's kind of a waste of time. I'd rather focus on getting the job done and generating them. So if I could plug into a decent sales channel and it was a reasonable price, we would just use that. But we
Mhm.
haven't found that yet. We do have a couple, and I will say really good things about two exchanges, which is Dobu in the UK and MSearch in the UK. They're doing their job. They move product, and if they move the product there, then that's ideal for us. So we can focus what we're doing in the Daring Gap and stuff below the canopy is a lot tougher. That's where we want to
Wow,
be working.
that's amazing. Have you had any traction from like family foundations, or like any of those types of folks?
No, we haven't. We've had a lot of benign interest, and they've actually that a lot of people in that segment have wasted our time and even cost us money by
Mhm.
saying, um, I've actually heard this 4 times, and I can put a price tag on it. It's about $10,000 that they took out of the pockets of indigenous people, where they were like, "It will be good for you to come to our event." Like,
Mm.
and I
Wow.
think that's a profoundly unethical attitude for somebody who is high net worth to
Mm.
have, which is um not taking accountability for their position. And I see after they've done it to us, I've looked around and I've seen done it to a lot of indigenous leaders over the years. Like, it'll be good for you to
Mm.
come to our event. We're not going to pay out of pocket. You just come, and then there's nothing that comes at the end of that. And that's really not kind, because the leader spends like $5,000, $3,000, leaves their jungle, leaves their accountability below the canopy, goes there in hope of presenting, is out of pocket and doesn't get reimbursed at all. And so that cost really adds up. So I stopped doing that completely. I would call that benign interest or benign non-action. And
Sure.
at first, I really engaged with it, thinking it will be good for us to go to your event. I will go and I felt like a dog sitting at the kitchen table with my tongue hanging out, like waiting
Mm.
for the food that never arrived. It wasn't working. Instead, the other pattern that we see, which is great, is there's a cohort of people we call friends, and they're like, "Look, I'm broke, can't help you, but let me do this for you. Like, introduce you to this person, show up to this conference for you, write a blog for you." You know, they're doing something tangible, and it's action based. It's social capital. It's not money. That's fine. That's good. And then the other group is just people who just come in and they like don't have a reason. They're like, you know what? I don't have a reason. Here's $200 for biodiversity credits. Next thing you know, it's on their business webpage. Next thing you know, they're getting a new consumer line because of it. And it just kind of grows naturally. And that's awesome.
Yes. Wow. I love that so much. And I like the naming of benign interests
Not
or
action.
yeah,
Yeah.
non-action, benign non-action. It's like I've been trying to like raise the term conscious capital for like a year or two that it would become a thing and that it could be heading your way, you know? So that is so disappointing. And it's also somewhat surprising to me that there's even sustainability events still taking place every month all around the globe, you know? That in itself, I know that there's a need for us to talk and share,
Coordinate. We have to coordinate and negotiate is what events are for.
coordinate and
Yeah.
negotiate. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think it's just there's somehow an oversaturation of things that feels maybe not so coordinated or thoughtfully negotiated, but that's also my probably my own shadow in a way.
I don't
Um,
go to events unless I have to. The only reason we go to an event, we have two reasons why we go. We have to negotiate, like hardcore, like need to show up and warm body in the room, gets shit done, negotiate.
yeah,
And then we also, the other reason is if somebody has already funded us and they request us to go report on the outcome of the funding, we'll go.
yeah.
We did make a survey of events last year to see if that sold any credits, and that was heartbreaking. Like it was just a complete waste of our time. So in general, we've been much more efficient by not going to events. I'm 100% behind virtual events. Um, and then if you guys see us an event with somebody, it's because they did something for us before we went. And then we have had a number of really cool high net worth people that have helped us out. Like it's not about income or ability. But the thing is they didn't come in and say it'll be good for you. They
Right.
just came in and said, let me solve that for you. And they did it immediately. They took action. And sometimes they didn't even tell us they were in a really good position. They just helped us out. So I think people who are going to actually help lead with action. And that's what we're looking for now.
Absolutely. And what do you have a perception around I mean, I want to be really careful about how I say this, but sort of a unification or a collective care model for expansion of what Savimbo's doing to incorporate, you know, a lot of other different tribes or different peoples, or like, is there a connective tissue or a web of webs that's happening in terms of being able to
Ooh,
scale?
you see, yeah, you must have gotten this directly. We've been talking with the indigenous leaders because they were like, we want to run the business, and I was like, no, you can't. Like, sorry, it's a rapid growth startup. Like, I cannot give it to you guys. I was like, why don't you guys run your business and then we'll be partners? And they were like, what's that? And we're like, okay. I was like, great, we got this. So I sent them this image that it seems like you're tapping into of like a social media network, and I was like, we're just like one little star in this universe. Like, there's this constellation of you guys all having your own cool little businesses, and we're friends and we're partners, and we're like baby turtles going to the ocean together. So, yeah, actually, I really am excited about being part of a bigger ecosystem of small indigenous businesses. I think it's important for us to show that businesses can be friendly, ethical, and easy to run.
Yeah,
And that helps create more peers.
absolutely. And I mean, really, small indigenous businesses have been existing and operating well before capitalist general businesses began in ways that are generative and supportive. So I recognize that indigenous relations are very well, they're all relationally based, right? So, or at least that's my perception, is it's very relational, not digital or, social media focused. It's peer to peer. So do you do you see a challenge in being able to connect um at a bigger scale with indigenous communities of that don't necessarily know each other, or like some sort of a mechanism that would be supportive of that, technologically speaking or otherwise, that would be like trustworthy? And I don't know, does that make sense what I'm asking?
No, no, it does. We use a protocol that we developed for the geniuses. So we had a genius consulting agency of 300 geniuses in 15 countries, and they just do not do what you want. So we specialized in non-McKinsey, low socioeconomic status genius. So people like me who grew up on the wrong side of tracks or whatever, never got identified. Like Chris Langan was a bartender, highest measured IQ in, I think, human history. So people who are working class or lower class, but still geniuses, the higher upper class geniuses usually end up at McKinsey or in different work environments. Anyway, long story short, our geniuses had particular characteristics. They were practically unemployable. They did not like to work an 8 to 5. They answered when they felt like it. Their interest would, there was all these different things. And so we developed these work protocols and communication things to keep them employed and cohesive and getting shit done, but still also the freedom that they needed to work. And
Mm,
surprise, surprise, those worked really well for coordinating Indigenous leaders at scale. And therefore, I can only conclude that generally Indigenous peoples are geniuses. But
yes.
I think they also tend not to, I tell them a lot, they seem not to prune the mind to the same degree with their youth. That's a generality I would make. And so when you work with an indigenous person, you're oftentimes working with somebody who's very much an outlier, and they control with that for that by doing collective decisions. So they seem to have a higher ratio of outliers in their communities, and then they converge into a collective decision which constrains it. And that's a different organizational principle. That's just my observation. That's not my rate to claim or not claim.
Sure. It's interesting to me because I have this inclination that so much about where we are as a species is like more related to unlearning than it is to learning intellectual intellectual stimuli that we often find in school and everything else. But I'm curious about that perspective on indigenous genius, and if it is in feels more connected through the body, through the channel, through earth, um, and that those channels are more healthily intact throughout life versus maybe distraction. But that's a
There is some
hypersimplification.
esoteric information that would reinforce that, but I don't feel like it's not my story to tell.
Yeah, right.
And also, I've learned because I'm 100% like just total Brangle. Like I really have worked to be authentic in terms of my ethnicity. So I'm
Mm,
definitely Euromite, Germanic, Italian, a little bit of like it's like everybody in Europe had an orgy and they made me. So I have no claim to indigeneity whatsoever. And I think it's really important that I do not, as an individual, offload my insights or my spirituality onto a culture that I can in no way own and don't necessarily fully understand. So I
yeah,
worked hard to be a good friend, but many of the principles that my friends tell me from their culture are stuff that I know from mine. So like I don't feel like I feel like spirituality is open source again, and it's universal. And so people might express it differently in different cultures. And just because the industrialized world is not the indigenous world doesn't mean it can't also be a cool expression of cool things to do. So I like the term hashtag solarpunk to kind of like talk about this happy expression of wherever you're at. You can maybe express a good city living in New York City or in Austin or in LA. You don't, not everybody has to go live in a remote area of the Amazon.
sure. No, I love that, and I think you're absolutely right. I'm um it. it's really inspiring and also beautiful to me to hear just that, about Indigenous genius. And to kind of switch gears a little, is the genius group that you mentioned, what was the name of that group again?
Oh, that was delinquent savants. That's what we called ourselves. We try not to talk about it very often. We all dropped our. We were like, we had a consulting company. We would just do things, and then we started a consulting company, and then we shut it all down, and we all went to work for Johnny and Fernando. So that's Savimbo. It's like a marriage of the two, and Savimbo's a baby. Like solarpunk and indigenous people had a baby, so Savimbo's the baby of the two groups getting it on.
Oh
And
my
we still, and we just kind of like merged protocols, and then because the geniuses were like, and the geniuses now include many indigenous geniuses, but we were all like, man, if we're gonna do one problem, this is it, man. Planetary boundaries, that's it. Like Fermi
Yeah,
paradox, this
yeah.
is it. This is like the problem of our lifetimes is the Fermi paradox.
It's so funny because
So
I've been saying for years, I've been saying the most genius people in the world are all together working on this planetary polycrisis. Like, there's some semblance of um deep faith that, right, people with the best hearts and minds are hard at work together. So delinquent savants makes me feel really, really great. And then as far as how did you find each other with the delinquent savants?
oh, there's classic tells. If you want to, if you can read the book, it's called The Drama of the Gifted Child by Alice Moore. Emotional needs of the gifted, SENG. There's tells. If you know what to look for and you've got it. It's we're very hard to get along with. There's a lot of drawbacks to having
Mm,
higher abilities. I'll give you an example too. Once you can distinguish who's smarter than you. I was with this guy in Silicon Valley, and he said something, and I was like, yeah, whatever. And then 3 months later, I realized he was right. And the time delay and we take it took me 3 months to figure out what he'd said kind of offhandedly was correct. That's how you know that the person is smarter than you. It's almost like a one-way mirror. When he said it, he sounded like an idiot to me. And then 3 months later, I realized, oh shit. So he had reached that conclusion. And I've seen that with other people who are smarter than me in different dimensions. And so once you get kind of the pattern, you can spot people, whether or not you are divergently in their field. Does that make sense?
yeah, it sure does. But it sure seems like you have that in many fields from your incredible background. And
I have
impulsive.
more than average in terms of, but I'm not usually a three to standard deviations off. I think my particular ability is the ability to assess somebody who is three standard deviations off in more than one of the intelligence. So I can tell people are musical geniuses, even though I'm not personally. Makes sense?
Wow. So you're a genius that knows geniuses, pretty much.
I'm
I mean,
I'm
you're,
pretty good coverage in the nine dimensions, so I can assess other people's. I've got a pretty good idea of my own ignorance, and then other people's genius in different areas, and that's my what I bring to the group is a pretty good cohesion. I can kind of get people, okay, you're two standard deviations off in this dimension, and then you're three, and then if you guys work together, you'll be able to do this. So that's kind of what I seem to
wow.
contribute on any
Wow.
given day. But God, I let me tell you, there are major emotional side backlashes to this. I call it a Lamborghini brain.
Yeah.
So you're driving faster, it's harder to control the car. When you spin out of control, you'd have some spectacular crashes. There are problems with speed.
I totally can resonate with that idea. Absolutely. Um,
Yeah.
and tell me, Impulsive Inc. is your nonprofit. And what you say on your website is that it was created because of your immense gratitude for the abundance of friendship, nature, and intelligence which surrounds you. So it sounds like there's some serious geniuses involved in that too. What kind of work are you doing with Impulsive Inc.?
Oh, so Impulsive Inc. was the spin-off structure. So we would develop stuff in the for-profit consulting company, and not everything was commercializable. So we'd spin it off into the nonprofit. And then that nonprofit also works as the nonprofit for Savimbo. So when Savimbo wants to do donations and stuff, we just run it through the nonprofit. The nonprofit's 100% subsidized by the external for-profit entity, so it has zero costs.
Wow. Wow.
But it's
Incredible.
it's a way to like give back. So if we're giving back to a community, the nonprofit also takes all comers. So what's different between a for-profit and a nonprofit is a for-profit can be selective, but a nonprofit has to treat a population.
Right. Right. Interesting. And with I guess with back to delinquent savants, like, did you just did you connect with these people in real life in passing or like hear about them or I mean, like to me that the genius
Buzz, get in a
magnetism.
fight. Yeah, like I mean, oh my God, I remember one of them took me out at the knees for a consulting contract. They like totally stole it from me and fired me. And I called them back and I was like, okay, I was like, if you can be nice, let's work together again. You're really smart. You did a better job than I did. So like part of it is just not taking things personal.
Yeah, that's
And
awesome.
then yeah, somebody I met on the bus, like a lot of people were like working at other people's jobs and then they get fired or something. And I'd be like, hey, I know you're fired now, so want to come by and work for us. So I've been collecting for a long time.
I love it. Thank you for your
Yeah.
service. Thank you for collecting. Thank you for all you're doing with Savimbo and everything else that you have done and will continue to do. Um, and I want to end with we always kind of ask about what you imagine, see, and feel as far as like the highest possible future. I mean, we've got a lot of complex challenges at this time, but like, what do you see as potential? And what would that look like for you?
I read this book called Adiamante. I found it incredibly meaningful. They were talking about an ecological future that was peaceful, and they'd been through some hard lessons in terms of warfare to get there. Also like solarpunk, Children of Men is some really interesting stuff. Um, or Children of Time, sorry, by Adrian Tchaikovsky. In this lifetime, or like
There's no limit to your imagination on this.
I always see this like really it's kind of like a hard to describe motif, like hashtag solarpunk, this bright, beautiful planet that's like cleaned up a bit and where we have a semi-permeable membrane and the wild places of the world are still wild. And the people
Mm,
who live in the wild places of the world, they don't necessarily have to be technologically back, like I shouldn't say technologically restricted, but they've kept onto the paradigms that
mm,
of lack of consumption for wild places so that we still have them. And then we probably would be a starfaring species if we could pull that off. Like
mm,
I think that we have the potential to be a starfaring species and we should aim for it with full consciousness of what it requires. And it doesn't mean launching too early. If we don't have the resources and we can't stabilize the launch pad, we don't go. We
right.
wait until we can, and we can solve a lot of the space problems here because this problem of junk in space is the same problem as junk in your backyard. So when we're solving star pairing problems, we're also solving good old back home problems.
Yeah, right. The micro and the macro. Well, thank you so much, Drea, for this time. It's
Oh,
been such a gift, and I would love to hang out with you and your geniuses, and I mean, and Savimbo. I mean, sounds like such an amazing place to be and such heart filling work. While I know it's also can be so challenging to try to get the business as usual world to fund the things that and innately understand need the funding and need to continue to exist and flourish. So thank you for all that you're doing, and just wanted to open up any other final comments or thoughts about both how Savimbo can be supported and any other comments.
oh yeah, I got a bee in my bonnet in 2002 that I was going to bicycle across the US. And I was like, there's this whole leading up to it. I'm gonna do this. It's gonna be amazing. You were gonna die in a ditch, and then like got on the bicycle, and at the first like 1,000 miles were cool. I was like, I'm a bicyclist bicycling across the U.S. And then I hit Texas, and it was
Mm,
1,000 miles, like just flat, or sometimes Helly, Texas, just staring at my bicycle tire, flat, painful. Right then my ass was starting to hurt. Bicycle got like 27 flats once in Navajo territory and just grinding. And I feel like sometimes people forget the Texas part. Like they want to, and so we got to the other side, we bicycled across the US 6 weeks. rode off into the sunset and have a great party story to tell. But what I didn't forget about that whole experience was bicycling across Texas. I did later on just kind of like, whatever. A lot of people could do it, but I did not forget what it looked like in the middle. So
Mm.
currently I am definitely in the middle, and I have to vouch for the middle. The middle is really important. So if what you're doing is not glamorous, if it's hard work, if it looks like shit, if you feel like you'll never get there, that's okay too. It's not all like beginning and end.
Mm. That personally resonates for me very deeply. I Texas is challenging.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for this conversation. Really, really appreciate you and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.